The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace glittered under 1,000 crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of champagne and roses. Outside, London slept under a cold November sky. Inside, the royal family gathered for what should have been a night of celebration. But something was about to go terribly wrong. Camilla stood near the center of the room, her emerald gown catching the light. Around her neck hung a necklace that had been in the royal collection for over 2 centuries. Diamonds and sapphires formed an intricate pattern, each stone worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The piece had belonged to Queen Victoria herself. Princess Anne watched from across the room. Her eyes were fixed on that necklace. Her jaw was tight. Something flickered in her expression that no one else seemed to notice. The evening had started like any other royal gala. Diplomats mingled with nobility. Waiters glided between guests with silver trays. Classical music drifted through the air like silk. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled, until it wasn't. If you're captivated by stories that reveal the hidden moments behind palace walls, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. A royal guard named Thomas stood at attention near the east entrance. He had served the crown for 12 years. He knew every protocol, every rule, every gesture that separated proper conduct from scandal. Tonight, he wore his ceremonial red uniform, the fabric stiff and formal. His face showed nothing, but inside his heart was pounding. Earlier that day, Thomas had received an order. Not through normal channels. Not from his commanding officer. The instruction had come from someone far higher in the royal hierarchy. Someone whose word could not be questioned. The order was simple and shocking. At precisely 9:45, he was to approach the Queen Consort. He was to remove the necklace she wore, and he was to deliver it directly to Princess Anne. No explanation. No context. Just the command. Thomas had read the note 3 times. His hands had trembled slightly as he held the paper. In all his years of service, nothing like this had ever happened. Royal guards did not touch members of the family. They did not interfere with ceremonies. They certainly did not remove jewelry from the Queen Consort in front of a room full of witnesses. But the order had been clear, and refusal was not an option. Now, as the clock above the doorway showed 9:43, Thomas felt sweat forming beneath his collar, despite the cool air. He watched Camilla laugh at something a French ambassador said. She touched the necklace absently, adjusting it slightly. She had no idea what was coming. Princess Anne stood alone near a marble pillar. She held a glass of wine, but hadn't taken a sip in 10 minutes. Her eyes never left Camilla, never left that necklace. The clock ticked to 9:40-4. Thomas stepped forward. His boots clicked against the polished floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud. A few heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. He walked directly toward Camilla. The Queen Consort looked up, surprised. A guard approaching during a formal event was unusual. Her smile faded slightly. Confusion crossed her face. Thomas stopped 2 feet in front of her. The room had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. He spoke in a voice that carried across the ballroom. "Your Majesty, I have been instructed to retrieve the necklace." Camilla's hand flew to her throat. Her fingers touched the diamonds protectively. The color drained from her face. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice wavered slightly. "There must be some mistake." Thomas kept his expression neutral, professional. But inside, every instinct screamed at him to turn around and walk away. This was wrong. Everything about this moment felt like a violation of every rule he had sworn to uphold. "No mistake, Your Majesty. I have direct orders." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper, royal letterhead. An official seal pressed into dark blue wax. Camilla took the paper with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the words. Once, twice. Her face went from pale to red. Anger flashed in her eyes. "This is absurd," she whispered, but loud enough that people nearby heard. "This is my necklace. It was given to me by... The necklace belongs to the crown, Your Majesty." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "It is to be returned to Princess Anne immediately." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every eye in the room turned to Princess Anne. She stood completely still. Her face showed no emotion, no surprise, no satisfaction, nothing. She simply waited. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones stayed in pockets. No one dared photograph this moment. But everyone knew they were witnessing something historic, something that would be whispered about for years. Camilla's hands trembled as she reached behind her neck. The clasp was delicate, difficult. Her fingers fumbled with it. For a moment it seemed she might refuse, that she might simply walk away and let the scandal unfold however it would. But she was still a queen. Still bound by protocols older than nations, the necklace came free. She held it for one long moment. The stones caught the light and threw rainbows across her palm. 200 years of history, of power, of legitimacy, all contained in one piece of jewelry. Thomas extended his white-gloved hand. Camilla placed the necklace into it. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible. "Tell her she's made her point." Thomas bowed slightly. He turned on his heel with military precision and walked across the ballroom toward Princess Anne. Every step felt like it took an hour. The crowd parted silently. No one spoke. The only sound was his boots on marble and the distant music, which no one had thought to stop. Princess Anne watched him approach. Her expression never changed. When Thomas reached her, he bowed deeply and held out the necklace. "Your Royal Highness." Anne took it slowly. Her fingers closed around the diamonds. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Relief, triumph? Grief? It was impossible to tell. Then the mask returned. She held the necklace up slightly, examining it in the light. Everyone watched, waiting for her to say something, anything. But Princess Anne was not known for grand gestures or emotional displays. She simply nodded once to Thomas, then turned and walked toward a side door. Her footsteps echoed. The necklace disappeared with her into the shadows of the palace corridors. Behind her, the ballroom erupted. Voices rose in shocked whispers. Diplomats turned to each other with wide eyes. Members of the royal household stood frozen, uncertain whether to follow Anne or stay with Camilla. The French ambassador looked like he might faint. Camilla stood exactly where Thomas had left her. Her hand still touched her now bare throat. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The emerald gown that had seemed so magnificent moments ago now appeared almost garish, without the necklace to anchor it. A lady-in-waiting rushed to her side. "Your Majesty, are you?" "I'm fine," Camilla said quickly. Too quickly. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "I'm perfectly fine." But her voice cracked on the last word. Thomas remained at attention near the pillar where Anne had stood. His duty was complete, his order carried out, but he felt no relief. Only a deep, uncomfortable awareness that he had just participated in something far larger than a simple transfer of property. This was about power, about legitimacy, about wounds that went deeper than anyone outside the family could understand. And judging by the chaos spreading through the ballroom, the aftermath was only beginning. The next morning, London woke to headlines that screamed across every newspaper and website. Photos of the ballroom had somehow leaked. Not of the moment itself, but of the aftermath. Camilla's shocked face, the empty space at her throat, Princess Anne walking away with something clutched in her hand. The palace issued no statement. That silence spoke louder than any official response could have. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was ice. Staff moved through corridors with their eyes down. No one wanted to be caught gossiping. No one wanted to accidentally overhear something they shouldn't. The walls had ears, and today those ears were listening more carefully than ever. Thomas stood in his small quarters in the guard's wing. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Camilla's face. The moment of humiliation, the tears she had fought so hard to contain. Knock came at his door. His commanding officer entered without waiting for a response. Colonel Morrison was a man who had served 3 monarchs. His face rarely showed emotion. Today it showed nothing at all. "You're being reassigned," Morrison said without preamble. "Effective immediately. You'll be stationed at Windsor Castle. Minimum public interaction." Thomas had expected this. Orders like the one he had carried out always came with consequences. Even when you did everything right, you still became a liability. A loose thread that needed to be tucked away. "I understand, sir. Do you?" Morrison's eyes were sharp. "Last night, you became part of royal history. That's not always a comfortable place to be. Did I do something wrong, sir?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, and for the first time Thomas saw the man behind the uniform. "No, son. You followed orders. That's all any of us can do. But sometimes following orders puts you in the middle of battles you don't understand." He left without another word. Thomas packed his things in silence. 12 years of service. 12 years of standing at attention, of protecting people who never looked at him twice. And now he was being exiled to Windsor because he had been loyal, because he had done exactly what was asked. But whose orders had he really followed? That was the question that haunted him. Meanwhile, in a private sitting room deep within the palace, Princess Anne sat alone. The necklace lay on a velvet cloth in front of her. Morning light streamed through tall windows, making the stones glow like captured stars. She hadn't put it on. Hadn't even touched it since bringing it here last night. She simply stared at it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she said, without turning. Her private secretary, Margaret, stepped inside. She carried a leather folder and wore the careful expression of someone delivering bad news. "Your Royal Highness, the morning briefing. The press coverage is extensive. There are calls for a statement, questions about the necklace's ownership, some rather pointed commentary about the appropriateness of 'let them talk,'" Anne said quietly. Margaret hesitated. "Ma'am, with respect, this is becoming a significant story. The narrative is forming without palace input. Some outlets are suggesting this was a personal attack. Others are questioning the chain of custody for crown jewels. There's even speculation about—" "I said let them talk, Margaret." The secretary fell silent. She knew that tone. After 20 years of service to Princess Anne, she recognized when pushing further would be pointless. Anne finally turned from the window. "Do you know why this necklace matters, Margaret? It's historically significant. Queen Victoria's personal collection, I believe. It was my grandmother's favorite piece." Anne's voice was soft now, almost distant. "She wore it when she was crowned, when she married my grandfather, when she held my father for the first time. She wore it at every significant moment of her life." Margaret said nothing. She sensed there was more. When she died, she left specific instructions. This necklace was to pass to the Princess Royal, to me. Anne touched the velvet cloth lightly. Not to the Queen Consort, not to anyone else. To me, it was in her will, documented, legal, unambiguous. Then how did it, because after the funeral, in the chaos of sorting her belongings, it ended up in the wrong collection? The general crown jewels, instead of personal bequests, and by the time anyone realized the error, Camilla had already claimed it, had already worn it publicly, had already made it part of her image. Margaret's eyes widened. "You've been fighting to get it back. For 2 years? Through channels, through lawyers, through quiet conversations with people who should have helped but chose not to?" Anne's jaw tightened. "They kept telling me to be patient, to wait, to not make waves. As if my grandmother's wishes were negotiable. So last night I stopped asking." Anne stood and walked to the window again. Outside, tourists gathered around the palace gates taking photos. Oblivious to the drama unfolding behind these walls, I went to someone who could give an order that couldn't be ignored. Someone who understood that this was about more than jewelry. Margaret absorbed this carefully. "And the guard, Thomas, will be protected." Anne's voice was firm. "He followed legitimate orders. He did nothing wrong. If anyone tries to punish him, they'll answer to me." A long silence filled the room. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "Your Royal Highness, what happens now?" This can't be the end of it. Anne turned back to face her secretary. In the morning light, she looked older somehow, tired but resolute. Now we wait for Camilla to decide whether she wants this to be a private family matter or a public war. And in another wing of the palace, Camilla was making exactly that decision. Camilla sat at her writing desk, a position she had occupied for hours. Letters lay scattered across the mahogany surface. Some crumpled, some torn, none sent. How did you respond to something like this? How did you maintain dignity when you had been stripped of it in front of the world? Her private phone buzzed. A message from an old friend. Then another, and another. Everyone wanted to know if she was all right. Everyone wanted the story. Some offered support. Others, she suspected, simply wanted gossip to share at their next dinner party. She turned the phone face down. A knock at the door. Her senior lady-in-waiting Victoria entered with tea. The woman had been with Camilla for 15 years. She knew when words were needed and when silence was better. Victoria poured the tea without speaking. The familiar ritual was comforting. Steam rose from the delicate china cup. The scent of bergamot filled the air. "They're calling it the necklace incident," Victoria finally said. "Some of the tabloids have crueler names." Camilla smiled bitterly. "Of course they do. A queen humiliated makes for excellent reading." "You're not humiliated, ma'am. You were put in an impossible situation." "Was I?" Camilla lifted her tea, but didn't drink. "Or did I take something that wasn't mine and refuse to give it back until I had no choice?" Victoria started to protest, but Camilla held up a hand. "I knew the necklace was meant for Anne. I knew it was in her grandmother's will. But I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just jewelry, that I had earned the right to wear crown jewels like any other queen consort in history. You have earned that right, have I?" Camilla's voice was barely a whisper now. "I wore that necklace at 3 state dinners. For charity galas. I was photographed in it, praised for my style. And every single time, Anne had to watch me wear something that should have been hers. Something her grandmother wanted her to have." She set down her teacup with a sharp clink. "I was petty, Victoria. I knew it bothered her, and some part of me enjoyed that. Enjoyed having something she wanted. After all these years of being the outsider, the one who didn't quite belong, I finally had something that made me feel like I was truly part of this family, ma'am. And now I've made everything worse." Camilla stood and walked to the window. The same view as Anne's rooms, just from a different angle. 2 women in the same palace, separated by history and hurt. Because if I admit I was wrong, I look weak. But if I fight back, I look vindictive. There's no way to win this. Victoria joined her at the window. "Then perhaps winning isn't the point." Camilla looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "You've spent your entire time in this family trying to prove you belong, trying to earn respect, trying to be perfect." Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe this is an opportunity to be human instead." The words hung in the air. Camilla turned them over in her mind. Be human, show weakness, admit mistakes. Everything royal training taught you never to do. But perhaps Victoria was right. Perhaps perfection was the wrong goal. Camilla made a decision. "Get me a meeting with Anne. Private. No staff. No witnesses. Just the 2 of us." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Are you certain, ma'am? After last night, she may not be receptive." "I don't care if she's receptive. She deserves a conversation. A real one. And I owe her an apology she'll never get if I hide behind protocol and wounded pride." The meeting was arranged for that evening. A small sitting room in a neutral part of the palace. No guards at the door. No one to interrupt. Princess Anne arrived first. She wore simple slacks and a sweater. No jewelry at all. Her face was guarded, expression unreadable. She sat in an armchair near the fireplace and waited. Camilla entered 5 minutes later. She had dressed simply too. The contrast to last night's emerald gown couldn't have been sharper. She looked smaller, somehow, vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said. Anne nodded once. Said nothing. Her eyes tracked Camilla's every movement. Camilla sat across from her. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the room. Where did you even start a conversation like this? How did you bridge years of tension and last night's humiliation? I owe you an apology, Camilla began. Her voice was steady, but quiet. Not for wearing the necklace originally. I genuinely didn't know its significance at first. But once you told me, once I understood it was specifically left to you, I should have returned it immediately. Anne's expression didn't change. She simply waited. Instead, I told myself it didn't matter. That crown jewels belong to whoever wears the crown. I convinced myself you were being unreasonable. Too attached to a piece of jewelry? Camilla paused, choosing her words carefully. But it was never about the necklace, was it? No, Anne said quietly. It was the first word she had spoken. It was about being heard. About being respected. About being part of a family that honors its own history and its own members. I made you fight for something that should have been freely given. You made me beg. Anne's voice was sharp now. For 2 years, through official channels, through private requests, I was told to be patient, to be understanding, to remember that you were new to this role and needed support, as if your comfort mattered more than my grandmother's final wishes. Camilla felt the words like physical blows. But she didn't look away, didn't defend herself. She simply listened, because this was what Anne deserved. To be heard, finally. Last night was the only option I had left, Anne continued, going above everyone who had dismissed me, making it impossible to ignore. And I would do it again, Camilla. I would humiliate you in front of that entire room again if that's what it took to get what my grandmother wanted me to have. The brutal honesty hung between them. No softening. No politeness. Just truth. Camilla nodded slowly. I understand. And I don't blame you. Anne's eyes widened slightly. Whatever she had expected, it wasn't that. I don't blame you, Camilla repeated. Because you're right. I've spent so many years feeling like the outsider that I forgot what it must feel like for you. You've been in this family your entire life. You've served the crown with dedication I can't even imagine. And then I arrive and suddenly I'm the one being protected. The one being accommodated. While you're told to wait, Anne's rigid posture softened slightly, not much, but enough to be noticeable. I've made many mistakes since joining this family, Camilla continued. Most of them I can justify. I can explain. But keeping that necklace? That was pure selfishness. I liked how it made me feel. Important. Legitimate. Like I truly belonged to something that had always seemed just out of reach. And now? Anne's question was direct. Now I realize that belonging doesn't come from jewelry or titles or wearing the right things to the right events. It comes from doing right by the people around you. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something you value. The log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Both women watched the flames dance. The silence between them felt different now. Less hostile. Not friendly exactly, but not combative either. My grandmother was an extraordinary woman, Anne said finally. Her voice had lost its sharp edge. She understood duty in a way most people never will. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, was calculated to serve something larger than herself. I wish I could have known her better. She would have liked that you're being honest now. She had no patience for pretense or political maneuvering within the family. She believed in dealing with problems directly, almost smiled. I suppose I inherited that from her. Last night certainly proved that, and did smile then. Brief, but genuine. It wasn't my finest moment, but it was effective. Brutally so. Camilla found herself smiling too. The French ambassador looked like he might have a heart attack. Hey, I saw that. I almost felt bad. Almost. The moment of shared humor eased something that had been knotted tight between them. It didn't erase the hurt. Didn't magically fix years of tension. But it created a small opening. A possibility that perhaps they could move forward differently than they had before. The press is having a field day, Camilla said. I've had 3 calls from the communications office asking how to respond. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Camilla met Anne's eyes directly. This is your moment, Anne. Your grandmother's legacy. How we handle this publicly should be your decision. Anne studied her for a long moment. You're giving me control of the narrative? I'm acknowledging that this was never my story to control. It's yours. It always has been. For the first time since entering the room, Anne's guard fully dropped. She leaned back in her chair, the exhaustion of the past 2 years suddenly visible on her face. I don't want a public war. I never did. I just wanted what was mine. What my grandmother wanted me to have, and we'll make a joint statement. Brief, dignified, explaining that there was confusion about the necklace's provenance, and it's now been properly returned according to the late Queen's wishes. We present a united front. Show that this was a private matter that's been resolved. Tabloids won't believe it. Tabloids never believe anything that isn't scandalous. But the people who matter, the ones who understand how this family works, they'll see that we're choosing grace over drama. Camilla paused. And more importantly, it will be true. This is resolved. You have what should always have been yours. Anne considered this carefully. Strategy had always been her strength. She understood the value of controlling a story before it controlled you. All right, a joint statement. But I want it clear that the necklace was specifically bequeathed to me. Not vague language about crown jewels or estate confusion. The truth, Camilla agreed. Nothing less. They stood simultaneously. The meeting was over. But before Anne could leave, Camilla spoke again. I know this doesn't fix everything between us. Years of tension don't dissolve in one conversation. But I hope it's a start. Anne was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. A start. That's all either of us can ask for. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. The guard Thomas? He was just following orders. My orders, specifically. I don't want him punished for doing his duty. I'll make sure he's protected, Camilla promised. He showed remarkable courage last night. Both in following orders and in handling an impossible situation with dignity. He did. Anne's respect was clear in her voice. We should both remember that. The people who serve us often carry the weight of our choices. They deserve better than to become collateral damage in our personal battles. With that, she left. The door closed softly behind her. Camilla stood alone in the sitting room. The fire was dying down now, coals glowing orange in the dimness. She felt lighter somehow. Not happy exactly. The humiliation of last night still stung. The tabloid headlines would sting for weeks to come. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Respect, hard-earned, honest, the kind that came from admitting you were wrong and doing what you could to make it right. It wasn't victory, but perhaps it was something better. The next morning, a joint statement went out. Brief, clear, dignified, just as they had agreed. The press tried to dig for more drama, but found none. The palace staff stopped whispering in corners. The tension that had permeated every corridor began to ease, and in Windsor Castle, Thomas received a letter on palace stationery. It thanked him for his service and assured him that his career would not suffer for following legitimate orders. The letter was signed by both Camilla and Princess Anne. He read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. 12 years of service, and this was the first time he had received a personal letter from any member of the royal family. Sometimes, he thought, doing the right thing cost you dearly, but sometimes, if you were lucky, it earned you something money couldn't buy. Respect, recognition, knowledge that you had played a small part in helping to people find their way back to common ground. The necklace sat in Princess Anne's private collection now. She wore it exactly once more at a small memorial service for her grandmother on what would have been her birthday. Then she carefully stored it away in a velvet-lined case, where it would wait for the next generation. Because that was the thing about legacy. It wasn't about possession. It was about honoring those who came before and preserving what they valued for those who would come after. And in that, finally, both women had found agreement. 3 months passed. Winter turned to early spring. Daffodils bloomed in the palace gardens, bright yellow against gray stone. Life at Buckingham Palace returned to its usual rhythm. State dinners, charity events, the endless machinery of royal duty grinding on as it always had. But something had shifted. Something subtle that most people wouldn't notice, but those who lived within these walls could feel. Camilla and Anne were not friends. They would never be. Their personalities were too different, their histories too complicated. But they had achieved something perhaps more valuable than friendship. They had reached understanding. At events, they stood together without tension. They spoke without that careful edge that had characterized every interaction before. When it needed support on a difficult policy issue, Camilla offered it without hesitation. When Camilla struggled with a particularly vicious press attack and issued a rare public defense, they were family. Not in the warm, fuzzy way people imagined families should be, but in the real, complicated, sometimes painful way families actually were. They had hurt each other, acknowledged it, and chosen to move forward anyway. Thomas eventually returned to Buckingham Palace, not to his previous post, but to a role training new guards. He found he liked teaching, liked passing on not just the protocols and procedures, but the deeper lessons about service and difficult choices. He never spoke publicly about that November night. When new recruits asked about his most memorable moment on duty, he would simply smile and change the subject. Some stories weren't his to tell. Some experiences remained private, held close like secrets. But late at night, when the palace was quiet and he walked the corridors on his rounds, he would sometimes pass the ballroom, the same space where crystal chandeliers glittered and the air smelled of roses, where he had done the hardest thing he had ever been asked to do, and he felt proud. Not of the drama, not of the humiliation he had been forced to deliver, but of following through, of being the kind of person who could be trusted with impossible tasks. That meant something. In a world where trust was rare, that meant everything. The necklace itself became a footnote to history. Scholars wrote articles about its provenance. Historians documented its journey through royal hands. But to those who had been there that night, it represented something more than jewelry or historical artifacts. It represented the moment two strong women stopped hiding behind protocol and faced each other honestly. When pride gave way to truth, when the need to be right became less important than the need to do right, Anne wore the necklace one more time years later. Her own daughter's wedding, she fastened it around her neck in a private moment before the ceremony, her fingers finding the clasp with practiced ease. In the mirror, she could almost see her grandmother, could almost hear that familiar voice reminding her that grace and strength were not opposites. That true power came not from what you could take, but from what you chose to give. She touched the stones gently. "This one's for you, grandmother," she whispered. Then she went downstairs to where family waited, where Camilla waited, ready to help with final preparations, ready to share in this moment without resentment or competition, because that was what family did. Not the fairy tale version, but the real version. They hurt each other and forgave each other. They fought and reconciled. They held grudges and then eventually let them go. The palace staff who had witnessed that November night would tell the story for years. Some versions became exaggerated. Some details got changed. But the core of it remained true. A guard walked across a ballroom and changed everything. Not through violence or rebellion, but through simple obedience to an order that forced truth into the open. Sometimes that's all it took. One moment of courage. One person willing to be the catalyst for change, even knowing they might suffer for it. One instance where doing the right thing mattered more than comfort or safety. And sometimes, just sometimes, that moment created space for healing. The tourists who visited Buckingham Palace never knew any of this. They took their photos through iron gates. They watched the changing of the guard with phones held high. They imagined lives of perfect glamour behind those stone walls. They didn't know about the messy human moments, the mistakes and apologies, the battles fought in private rooms over things that mattered deeply to those involved, even if they seemed trivial to outsiders. But that was all right. Some stories weren't meant for public consumption. Some truths were private things, shared between people who had earned the right to know them. The necklace sat in its velvet case, waiting, always waiting, for the next generation, For the next moment, when someone would need to wear a piece of history and remember that with privilege came responsibility, with power came duty. With family came both burden and blessing. And somewhere in Windsor Castle, an aging guard finished his rounds. He locked doors and checked windows. He ensured everything was secure for another night. It was simple work, repetitive, unglamorous, but he did it with care, with attention to detail, with the same commitment he had shown that November night when he walked across a ballroom and changed to women's lives forever, because that was what service meant. Not the grand moments, not the recognition or praise, but the quiet dedication to doing what needed to be done, whatever the cost. The palace slept. London slept. But the lessons of that night lived on in the hearts of those who had been there, who had witnessed what happened when pride met principle, when hurt met honesty, and in the end, that was the real legacy. Not a necklace. Not a scandal. Not a story for the tabloids, but the knowledge that even in a family bound by centuries of tradition and protocol, change was possible. Growth was possible. Forgiveness was possible if people were brave enough to try. The chandeliers in the ballroom sparkled in the darkness, catching moonlight through tall windows. The same room where everything had changed, where two paths had collided and somehow found a way to move forward together. The stones in the necklace, locked away in their velvet case, held no memory of that night. They were just minerals. Just carbon and elements pressed together over millions of years. Their value was assigned by humans, their significance invented, but to Anne, they represented her grandmother's love. To Camilla, they represented a lesson learned. To Thomas, they represented duty fulfilled. And perhaps that was the real magic of such objects. Not what they were, but what they meant. The stories they held, the moments they marked, the changes they witnessed. 3 months after that November night, Camilla and Anne sat together at a small family dinner. No press, no officials, just relatives sharing a meal. At one point, their eyes met across the table. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. We survived this. We're still here. We're all right. Neither spoke the words aloud. They didn't need to. Some conversations happened in glances and gestures. In the space between words, outside, rain began to fall on London. Soft at first, then harder. Spring rain that washed the streets clean and made the gardens bloom. Rain that came and went, leaving everything fresh and renewed. Inside the palace, life continued, imperfect, complicated, human, and that, in the end, was exactly as it should be.